Okay, going live. Have fun.
Hi, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. If you're interested in seeing captioning, the directions are on the screen. Good morning, everyone, or actually good afternoon. Welcome to the second presentation of the ADA Generation survey on recent college graduates conducted by the Kessler Foundation. Today we're going to hear from a few individuals with disabilities, so a few recent college graduates with disabilities, and kind of gauge their experiences and their views with the results of the survey. If you're not familiar, I'll talk a little bit about the survey in a minute. So my name is Andrew Houtenville. I'm a professor of economics from the University of New Hampshire. And first things first, if you're interested in captioning, captioning is available through Zoom. Previously, in some of the other events we've held, captioning has been provided at the bottom of the screen. However, Zoom has created a new closed captioning system, and we're using that new system. And so you should have an option for closed captioning. If you click on that, you can view the transcript as it's being, as I'm speaking, like right now, and right now, anyway. You can also, if you're interested, if you prefer, you can see the text via stream text, which is at www.screamtext.net/player?event=UNH. All right. Okay, so today's agenda. So I'll provide some introductory remarks and summarize the the findings of the Kessler Foundation National Employment and Disability Survey recent college graduates version. We'll hear from Liz Cardoso from Hunter College about youth with disabilities entering STEM careers. We'll have then a panel discussion led by John O'Neill with several members from the recent college graduate population, Anne Marie, Bryce, and Hugh, sorry. And then we're actually going to have about 15 minutes for Q&A. All right. So we're at about 175 participants, which is great. Let's get started with the introduction. So the Kessler Foundation has been conducting a series of surveys. In 2015, the first National Employment and Disability Survey was for workers with disabilities and really focused on the job search process and the workplace environment. And you can find, the link is provided for you there to find that survey, the results of that survey. In 2017, Kessler Foundation fielded the National Employment and Disability Survey from supervisor perspective. And so this is actually a very innovative survey that instead of trying to get supervisors while they're at work, which is really hard to get supervisors and employers and companies to open themselves up to research, we actually interviewed supervisors when they were at home. And that was the 2017 survey. The 2020 survey, Kessler Foundation National Employment and Disability Survey, is on recent college graduates because, you know, as we look at the ADA anniversary coming up and hitting the 30-year mark, there's a whole population of folks that have grown up that have never known a time when there wasn't an ADA, right? And so with folks at Kessler Foundation, Elaine Katz, John O'Neill, we narrowed the focus on the experiences, both in college experiences and out of college experiences, the entering the job market experience of people with disabilities who recently qualified from graduate school, recently graduated from college, sorry. All right, so some of the things that drove our questions was first, you know, certainly as I just mentioned, the 30 years anniversary of the ADA drove that, the decision to focus on recent college graduates. Also, you know, many people have some idea that, you know, we really need to look at whether the barriers that people face both in, you know, primary and secondary school and also in the workplace, whether colleges have figured out ways to to overcome some of the barriers that are traditionally found among people with disabilities, experienced by people with disabilities. Also, we wanted to look at things, how are they successfully transitioning? What are the successes? This really stemmed from the approach that was taken in the first Kessler survey, where we kind of knew that, you know, just from all the people we talked to, that people with disabilities are really striving to work, right? And getting a college degree is a part of that. And we wanted to kind of dig deeper into a specific area of how people with disabilities strive to work, strive to overcome barriers, and really wanted to change the focus of a large amount of survey work that focused on disparities and barriers. We really wanted to focus on overcoming barriers, right? And so recent college grads, if school is viewed as one of the most important things a person can do to advance their employment outcomes and advance their career, we wanted to study that in more detail. And so we wanted to also look at job characteristics, job qualities, and compare. And here's one of the things we really were very careful about, is we wanted to compare people with and without disabilities. Because just finding that it's difficult for a person with a disability to find a job, we really wanted to know, well, is that any different than a person without a disability having difficulty finding a job? So we really wanted to compare. A lot of the results, if you look at the whole survey, a lot of the results were actually very similar. We couldn't identify a statistically significant difference, and these are actually pretty big samples. And so that was the motivation for the study. We had about almost 5,000 participants from all 50 states. We restricted it to ages 20 to 35. Also people graduating within the last half year. We had 50% women, 50%, 49% men, 49% women, and 2% non-binary or trans. We had around 31%, 11%, and 17% Hispanic, white, black, and Hispanic respectively. Incomes around, roughly around the poverty range. We had about 35% below. We also had a quota of 50%. We wanted to make sure that we gave ourselves the advantage of being able to detect changes. So we boosted the sample of self-reported disability. All right, so that's some of the statistical properties. All right, so a few of the top line results. The report is available online. There are thousands of results. Thousands might be overstating it, hundreds. And my colleague Kim Phillips is here with me today, with us today, to answer some questions, because if you have questions, you can ask questions in the Q&A box. The chat function is disabled for participants, for non-panelists. So if you want to ask questions in Q&A, Kim has a great grasp of the results. And so she's here today. Anyway, I'm just going to talk about some of the top line results. One of the big differences we see is in college major. People without disabilities were more likely to be in business management. So the D represents disability. And whenever you see color in the chart, you'll actually, that's when a statistically significant difference was detected. Within the health and related sciences fields, you know, health and behavioral science fields, we were unable to detect the difference between people with and without disabilities. For STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, I almost said economics and math, but no. For science, technology, engineering, and math, there is a detectable difference. 30% of people, recent college graduates, majored in STEM, whereas 35% majored of people without disabilities majored in STEM. And so that's one of the reasons we brought Liz Cardoso into this discussion, and because we know that we already kind of knew that this was a potential difference, whether it's reflective of barriers or whether it's reflective of choices. I would say that it's a reflection of constrained choices, right? Not every choice is free, you know, and so the constraints and barriers of past experiences, expectations may play a role in some of these different choices that are made. All right, so career services. So we looked at the the survey instrument was really wonderful and really delved into a lot of areas. So this is, again, it's just a top line. We wanted to look at kind of the use of career services among people with disabilities. We were unable for many of the things like job fairs, mock interviewing, training, career exploration, resume, cover letter training. We couldn't detect a difference between people with and without disabilities. And this is 2000 versus 2000 more, on each one of these percentages is based on a really large sample. So being unable to detect the difference is pretty substantial. The one place we did detect a difference was meeting with a career counselor. People with disabilities were more likely to meet with a career counselor. So they're striving to work, they're striving to go out there and get it. And this is an example of that. The career-related internships. So one of the big things transitioning from college to work are internships, paid and unpaid. And also whether that internship was related to your intended field. We were able to detect a difference for had internships, whether those individuals had internships. People with disabilities were more likely to have, 68% had a disability. 68% of students with disabilities had an internship as opposed to 65% for students without disabilities. All right. Job search barriers. So again, were barriers faced and were they overcome as a big focus of the survey instrument. Employers assuming can't do job was statistically different. Not enough training, which is the top line here. There was no detectable difference in terms of search barrier for, not having enough training, lack of transportation, not enough education. We really didn't detect many differences. What we did detect is that employers could assume you can't do the job at 37% versus 25%. And again, this is people already graduating with college degrees, right? And so that's a bit discouraging. Receiving less pay than others is also reported, and also negative attitudes of an employer were reported as job search barriers. And so again, this is reflective of some of the information that have been found in previous surveys. This is even more robust because we're focusing on people who have a college degree, right? And so still seeing these kinds of assumptions or these kinds of attitudes is really disappointing. So I'll leave it at that. In terms of job category, going back to the idea of STEM, since we did recent college graduates, we had an idea of where they went to be employed, and person-related helping. So we categorized occupations with regard to the degree to which they assist others, and people with disabilities were more likely to be in those careers, 29 versus 22% for people without disabilities. Again, we see the tipping the balance the other way for STEM. People with disabilities were about 20% of recent college graduates had a bachelor's degree. With bachelor's degrees went into a STEM field, and versus 23% of people without disabilities. So again, that kind of balance, that imbalance that we saw in major also translated into the job market. All right, so now that sets up Liz. So Liz Cardoso, I'm happy to introduce Liz, and I have worked together for years. She's a professor of counseling at Hunter College in New York City, although I'd imagine she's not in the city today. Liz has been working with the National Science Foundation for many years on grants and related to STEM-related fields and having people with disabilities enter into STEM-related fields. So I'll turn it over to you, Liz. I'll advance the slides. Just tell me to advance the slides as we go.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. So yes, the grant was awarded National Science Foundation to Hunter College, and it's called the Mind Alliance. So it's for minority students with disabilities. And the goal and purpose of the grant was to increase the quantity and quality of students with disabilities from racial and ethnic minority backgrounds, going from high school to community college to college in the STEM disciplines, and also with the hopes that they would go into the workforce or graduate education or continue on to some sort of internships. This was done at the CUNY schools, at the City University community colleges and four-year senior colleges. And the high school students were from inner city in New Jersey. That's where we obtained our population. Advance. The activities that we proposed were the following. For the high school, the community college, and college students, we proposed summer and fall institutes. We learned that these summer and fall institutes were very important because during these institutes, workshops were provided by professors and people in the community that at times might have had disabilities and were in STEM careers. And we're willing to provide hands-on activities to demonstrate to students at the high school, community college, and college level the different types of sciences that were out there. So the purpose of the grant was to increase interest, and it was also to try to increase the pipeline. We also offered career assessment, planning, and counseling, which was very important, and it's something that Andrew mentioned about his research, that this also helped us assess where students were at, where they needed to go, and what type of counseling we needed to provide in order to get them to their destination. We provided field trips and science literacy training, and the field trips range from going to Exxon, New York Times, Liberty Science, anything that had to do with science in order to broaden their perspective into science. We also had teacher and school counselor workshops at the high school level. And basically, teacher and school counselor workshops was about discussing the stigma that at times is related to individuals with disabilities and what they can do to assist them in moving forward in the sciences. We had parent and family workshops. Those workshops were also very important because at times parents sort of have a preconceived notion of what their students can do based on what others tell them. And so these workshops were important in terms of providing them education and also providing them information about the different types of careers that are out there for STEM. The University Support and Disability Services, we have different names for it at different universities, and basically this office is really important to connect with, especially the students coming from high school that at times they feel they do not need to be connected because they do not want to have that stigma, whatever their disability is, and they want to do it on their own. What we've learned is that students usually connect with the Disability Service Office once their grades decrease and they need assistance. And so we paired up with the University Disability Office to offer workshops and support to students. Mentoring, role modeling, and tutoring were also very important. And as Andrew mentioned, the mentoring component, important in the general population as well as in the disability population. The mentoring being individuals with disabilities and those without disabilities, providing assistance and guidance through the different processes. The role modeling, very important, that at times people with disabilities don't see folks in STEM that have disabilities and have been successful. The tutoring, we found that was also very important. Even though the university provides tutoring, sometimes individuals with disabilities need additional tutoring. And so basically what we found is that we were bridging the gap between what the university was providing and what we were doing. And we were using peers in classes to assist these individuals with disabilities to make sure that they would do well in that class and move on to the next class in science. Research and internship opportunities were also very important. We found that a lot of our students had not had any work experience and at the high school, community college, and college. And this was the first time that they were actually applying for a position, being in the workforce and getting experience in the sciences. And the employment readiness, what we did is we did mock interviews, we assisted them with applications, we did everything that we could in order to get them ready and prepared to move on to the work environment. Next slide, Andrew. So the outcomes of the Mind Alliance was we served a total of 712 students, including high school, community college, and at the college level. And basically we're trying to increase the pipeline and provide them with quality STEM education and career development services. Next slide, Andrew. Our outcomes of the high school, inner city high school in New Jersey was 83% graduation rate, 20% transition to 2-year college and 4-year college, and 5% obtained employment. Now, in the district that we were actually servicing, the graduation rate is actually 33%. And so this was quite, we thought, an achievement of 83% graduation rate of the individuals that we had servicing through the Mind Alliance. The community college in CUNY, City University of New York, we had 73% graduation rate, 38 transitioned to 4-year college, and 33 went on to employment in some sort of STEM. Our 4-year college, senior colleges in CUNY, 71% college graduation rate, 12% transition to graduate school, and 74% completed graduate school and 25 STEM employment. Andrew? And so what did we learn from this Mind Alliance and providing all these services to high school, community college, and college level? We learned that the following that are listed here, summer and fall institutes, were very important. It provided them a space where individuals that had disabilities and had similar interests came together. The role modeling, tutoring, mentoring, as mentioned before, was so important in their success in being able to make it through and pass their classes and start thinking about careers in STEM. And as well as the exposure to internships, exposure to careers in STEM, exposure to individuals with STEM with disabilities and with STEM careers. It provided them a sense that they too can do this and they too can look into it, into these careers. They all mentioned that this was the first time that they have been with other students who had disabilities and similar interests, which was very important to them. They felt a sense of belonging. Andrew? Next slide. So what we did is once the Mind Alliance, the grant was over, we decided we wanted to obtain some qualitative information on these students. So we put out a call for voluntarily individuals that were interested in being interviewed. And what we wanted to know was what did they obtain from the Mind Alliance that was important to them, that helped them succeed, in their schooling. They indicated that the Mind Alliance provided them a sense of belonging and interpersonal support. They indicated that family, peers, faculty, mentors, advisors, and staff were very important in their success and staying in school. They also indicated that oh my goodness, I can't pronounce. Accommodation challenges, when individualized, were very important because it met their needs. It increased their academic outcome as well as self-esteem and self-determination. They also indicated that when it was individualized accommodations, and the response was negative at times from a teacher or a professor or an employer, that they felt that they needed to indicate the reasons that they needed this, and they felt very challenged, and they had a negative feeling about it. They didn't come out with a good feeling, that they felt that they needed to explain everything to them. Another issue was support services facilitating peer and university supports. So the support services that we were providing in the Mind Alliance was with peers, and those peers were assisting them, and they felt that that was really important. It was somebody that understood them, someone at the same age level, and of course the university supports, including the Mind Alliance and the Office of Disability, was very important. So some of these results are very similar to what Andrew had indicated in his research. And I think that's it, Andrew.
Great, thank you, Liz. Again, we'll do Q&A at the end, so if you have questions for Liz, we'll be able to address them. Next, we're going to turn to John O'Neill to lead the discussion. John's going to be the moderator. John is also was or is a professor at Hunter College in counseling, and he's also the director for the Center for Employment and Disability Research at Kessler Foundation. So take it away, John.
Good afternoon, everybody. We have three panelists today, recent college graduates, and they're highly reflective, I think, of the ADA generation. They were all born at a period of time when the ADA existed, and they've known no other era other than the one we're in and celebrating the 30th anniversary. We have Anne-Marie Rivera, and we have Bryce Stanley, and we have Hugh Dang. I am going to have them introduce themselves, and then we'll switch to a series of questions which they've had a chance to review, and we'll have the opportunity for them to respond to the questions that they see most appropriate. So, Anne-Marie, you're up first.
Very good. So hello, everyone. My name is Anne-Marie Vera. I am currently the coordinator of the Office of Disability Resources at the School of Visual Arts. I hold a bachelor's degree in arts and creative writing and a minor in psychology from Fairfield University. And I obtained my master's in counseling education as a rehabilitation counselor from Hunter in 2018, and currently work and am a certified rehabilitation counselor.
Okay, let's move on to Bryce. Bryce, you want to introduce yourself? I think you're muted.
My mistake. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I'm Bryce. I'm currently a PhD candidate in economics at the University of New Hampshire, where I study mental health policy and labor economics. I earned my master's degree also from the University of New Hampshire, and before that, I earned my bachelor's degree at Bryant University in Rhode Island. And I have some experience inside the private sector, but most of my experience has been in academia.
Okay. Moving on to Hugh Dang. Hugh, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Hugh Dang. I'm currently employed by Center for Independent of the Disabled, New York, Sydney, as a benefit counselor. I graduated with an associate degree from BMCC. The major is liberal art. After BMCC, I was transferred to Hunter College to complete my bachelor in psychology and minor in history. After obtaining my bachelor degree, I complete my master in rehabilitation counseling at Hunter College as well.
Okay. Let's go back and just, Anne-Marie, do each of you, would you mind just touching on your disability briefly?
Sure.
Anne-Marie?
My current, absolutely. Currently, my diagnosis is recognized as cerebral palsy, spastic diplegia. Primarily, my diagnosis does affect my ability to ambulate and move around. It primarily locates in my legs, but it also does affect my ability to process information. So it does take me a bit longer to process information.
And Bryce?
Sure. So I have MDD as well as a sleep disorder referred to as delayed sleep phase syndrome or delayed sleep phase disorder. And so in kind of layman's terms, this means that my natural body clock is kind of shifted several hours delayed from most people. So if I was kind of left to my own devices, my body would want to fall asleep around 4 or 5 a.m. and then wake up around 2 or 3 in the afternoon. And so that's not necessarily compatible with how society typically operates, and kind of shifting those hours, both the falling asleep earlier and the waking up earlier, can be very challenging and not something that can be done on kind of a consistent basis.
Hugh, do you want to say something?
Yes. This is Hugh again. I was born legally blind on both of my eyes. With my vision impairment, I barely recognize any people who stand in front of me. Pretty much to me, they are only an image, like a shadow, you know. In order for me to do my work or study during the time I was in college, I have to utilize the adaptive technology called JAWS. It's a screen reader software that helped me to read things and type information with Microsoft Word. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, thanks, Hugh. Okay, let's, Andrew, next slide, please. Oh, the one before, yeah. These are some of the questions that we had devised for our panel. They have all taken a look at those. While in college, what was the biggest barrier you faced and overcame? How did your disability influence your college education? What was your opinion of the college career and disability services? What was your experience like after graduating and entering the labor market? And what survey findings were most meaningful to you, and what survey findings were the most surprising? We'll kind of, I'll ask each panelist to kind of touch on the questions they would like to. And once again, we'll start with Anne Marie.
Very good. So with regards to the panel questions, the largest barrier that I faced early on in undergraduate was rectifying the physical limitations of my diagnosis to the actual limitations of moving around on campus while simultaneously doing work. As a result, it kind of influenced what goals would have transpired for me with regards to a major. I originally entered freshman year as a biology pre-med major, and by the time I left, I graduated with a bachelor's degree in writing. Having to figure out and having that trial and error period with the support of the disability services department on campus that worked really well in conjunction with other departments on campus, like the residence life and mental health and counseling and the various academic departments, really helped me assess what jobs would be feasible for me. And as I went throughout my college career, I started to understand where my strengths and weaknesses had lied and changed over time. And as a result, that kind of pushed me to go see career counseling when the STEM side of my life kind of changed and I was no longer doing as well. And I had to kind of reevaluate my plans, which was really a very positive experience. I was treated like any other student to try to assess what my new strengths were, what my new weaknesses were, and where my overall desire to pursue work was going to be. And I did identify as being in the service sector, wanting to help other people, very similar to the survey results of the participants in the survey as well. And as a result, I was kind of prepared to go into that type of sector, originally wanting to go into education with publishing as a way to pay my bills while trying to go for a master's in education. Unfortunately, because I'm from a very blue-collar family, my finances were very limited. And as a result, I had to kind of reassess again, when could I go for a master's degree? How is that going to be possible? And I really struggled to find any type of basic entrance type of position within the publishing fields, not really expecting a lot. As a result, often lowballing myself when applying for positions just to make myself more marketable. And as a result, until I got, involved with services like Access VR, I wasn't able to make that transitional jump into now doing a master's degree in counseling and now working as a counselor. Ultimately, I think the most meaningful survey findings was understanding kind of the patterns, now looking back, hindsight 2020, of having the access to a proper mentor, the access to an internship, the access to preparation for job services and what to kind of expect in those employment aspects, which in undergrad, they didn't really help me assess and understand what my challenges were as a person with a physical disability walking into the room with attitudes. And as a result, in my master's program, that was a 180-degree kind of spin, where everybody was preparing you from the moment you walked through the door, through the program, how to kind of conduct yourself. And what was most surprising is I was very isolated as a kid, being one of the few kids with a disability, to see other folks like myself or with various disabilities kind of going through similar experiences. I'm almost glad to see I'm not alone in this, and that the law seems to be definitely assisting us along the way, but there's lots more things to go forward with.
Thank you, Anne Marie.
You're welcome.
Bryce, do you have some
Sure.
responses to these questions?
Sure. So with respect to kind of the biggest barrier I faced with college, the answer would be getting in. I had just a very negative experience dealing with navigating my disability while in high school. So with my sleeping disorder, I missed the majority of my morning and early afternoon classes as a high schooler, and the administration at my school just was not particularly interested in finding accommodations or making any sorts of efforts to understand kind of what my situation was. If I had to speculate, I think having a disability that wasn't visible to them was something that perhaps they weren't familiar with and hadn't experienced before, and they weren't necessarily eager to find ways to accommodate me. So my high school GPA was incredibly poor, which was a large barrier when it came to getting into college. And so with that, I went to a community college first, and then transferred from there to a four-year school. So that definitely represents a way to which my disability influenced how I structured my college education. But then once in college, I did not make a lot of use of the disability services, I think for kind of two reasons. One being I didn't really know what was available. They weren't necessarily properly advertised to students during orientation. And I'm sure if you were to go in there, the people working there would be very happy to explain exactly what they can do, but it wasn't something I was super aware of. And a second reason being, my experiences before were very negative. Like I said, in high school, when it came to discussing and asking for accommodations with my disability, typically only bad things happened when I asked for that. So I was rather discouraged entering college when it came to kind of looking for accommodations. However, I was very lucky that I was able to take mostly afternoon and evening classes while in college, which was kind of a short-term solution to dealing with my disability. And then when entering the labor force, I primarily looked at jobs inside the startup industry because small and new companies are more flexible and have an easier time getting accommodations that I need, which are just largely a shifted workday as far as the hours go. And so I was fortunate enough to find some startups that would be willing to let me work, say, noon to 9 instead of 9 to 5 or something like that. And so that's kind of how I have navigated my sleeping disorder inside the workforce, is kind of targeting places that will be more likely to be accommodating to me. When looking at the survey results, I think my kind of attitude towards them changes depending on how much perspective you add, right? So at first, the numbers seem relatively positive. They're the people with disabilities, their outcomes are not that much worse than, you know, the graduates without disabilities. But then when I consider that, you know, this is a subsample of people with disabilities and only those that have a 4-year degree, then this pattern still continues even after you kind of narrow it down to this group of people with disabilities that have already completed a degree. I think that, you know, it diminishes the encouragement that I see.
Hugh, do you have some thoughts to add?
Yes. Let me talk about a little bit about my experiences. So, as I mentioned before, I was born legally blind. So I was put on the IEP track when I was in high school. So by the time I got put in to the mainstream track at during the 10th grade. So by the time I graduated from high school, my English, my reading, writing is not as good as other people who already put in the mainstream track early on. So because of that, I have to attend the 2-year community college. During the time I attend the 2-year community college, at that time I really afraid that the accommodation from high school, that I would not receive the same accommodation in college. So I was very fortunate because I met the director of Student with Disability Office. He informed me that whatever accommodation on my AAP, they will be able to provide all of that for me. So the only barrier that I encountered during the time I was in community college is that other people value me based on my blindness rather than who I am. So at that time, I really, you know, like afraid of how people are going to judge me based on my disability. But over the year, you know, like I was in college, I'm thinking, I say like, why do I have to hold on to how people view of me? Why not like thinking of how I'm going to view of myself, you know? And then because of that, I overcome the challenges during the time I was in college. And I also participate in a lot of different extracurricular activity, you know, like student government, you know, CUNY Coalition for Students with Disability, and other club and event throughout campus. So all of that is due to the fact that I'm thinking that since other people who have a perfect, you know, condition, like doesn't have any disability, they can do it. So why not individual with disability can do it too? You know what I mean? So because of that, I overcome a lot of, you know, like obstacle. And then after that, when I go to 4-year college, everything changing again for me, because during the time I was in BMCC, I worked very closer with the student with disability office. But when I go to college, the student with disability office at 4-year is very, very different, because they only dare to provide accommodation, but the connection is not the same as 2-year. And the most impressed me about the survey is that this survey, you know, find not see like the people who graduate from college or obtain employment after college is not really different for the people with disability and the people who with our disability. Pretty much.
Okay, thank you, Hugh. Thank you very much. I think we'll move to question and answers. Before we move to the to those that are viewing the questions and answers, just wondering if Andrew or Liz, if you have any questions for our panelists?
No, I don't.
Okay. Andrew?
Yes. Yeah. So could folks, unless your parents are listening in, our family members, would you talk a little bit about, would you talk a little bit about kind of the expectations that individuals, you know, may have of you? You know, it seems that it's kind of an undercurrent, both, you know, so I keep thinking of the book for young parents, right? What to expect when you're expecting, right? So what to expect when you're expecting a baby. And at each transition, there seems to be this change in you know, I don't know, the sets of expectations are different. The environment is different. And there's a period of adjustment that needs to happen. Can you talk, any of you talk about expectations? I'll just stop babbling.
I'm happy to start. So ironically, my parents really didn't have a lot of expectations, believe it or not. I can't speak for my other panelists, but many of their focuses were just wanting me to be happy and to be healthy, and whatever that manifested as, that's what we were kind of all going with as a family unit. So they were really kind of just always supportive and always in there. There was no major expectations. My family was extremely happy. I was one of the first family members to receive a four-year college degree, so that was a huge triumph when we completed it, but they didn't have very high expectations beyond just me wanting to be happy. If that's any insight, Andrew.
Sure, that's interesting.
So I'll go ahead and I will note that, Andrew, I believe my mother is watching, but that is largely and related to my answer. My mother is a PhD in education and works inside the special education field. And so she is very much involved in helping students with disabilities get accommodations and prepare to go out and whether it be in the workforce or however else they live their life outside of school. But so when it came to me kind of learning to navigate the options I had and accommodations and having someone to advocate for me, my mother's expectations for how I should be treated with respect to my disability were, you know, kind of the deciding factor. She advocated very largely on my behalf early on. And I think kind of her having high expectations for me, regardless of my condition, is definitely beneficial. So very, very fortunate in that respect.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So here's a question from the Q&A box. Were any students, were any of you interested in self-employment or entrepreneurship? And was this covered in any of the counseling you received? I'm not hearing anybody jump up and say absolutely. Can anybody jump up and say absolutely not?
I could say, I think absolutely not. The idea of becoming a writer and being published, I guess, is its own form of entrepreneurship, but the realities of how many people get published to the extent that they can live off that money extensively is very low. So I think there was a good realization from my mentorship when considering that as an extra avenue for income, but yeah, that is just something that never crossed my mind. I was always truthfully really focused on making sure I had enough money to have health insurance for that reason, to be really honest.
Yeah. Liz, when you were in your program, doing your program, was self-employment / entrepreneurship ever addressed during the curricula, during the time you guys had?
Yes, actually it was. And some of the students had brought it up. We had worked with them in terms of doing a business proposal and going through the process. I think one of the issues was finances, and one of the issues was healthcare, and also the fear of not succeeding and wondering what would happen to them. And they felt that they would feel more secure having a position within an organization or corporation that would provide them with the benefits needed instead of being on their own.
Yeah. While we're on Liz, there's a question. Did you collect any information on, say, type of disability and how they may have differed with regard to their experiences going into STEM careers?
Right. So we did collect data on disabilities. There was the array of disabilities, the physical disabilities, the learning disabilities, psychiatric disabilities. I don't think it differed, the types of disabilities going into the STEM employment or moving on into community college or college. What did come up was interesting was folks that, professors did approach me in the sciences, in the biological sciences, indicating that at times their labs were not structured for individuals with wheelchairs. And so they would have to do some physical changes to the labs to accommodate, which they were willing to do that. It would take some time, but they would be willing to do those structures. An example of that were faucets, things that we take for granted. We go and turn a faucet, put some water in, and we do our experiments. For folks with on a wheelchair, that was difficult, and they were too high, and so they had to move those faucets lower in order for individuals with disabilities to be able to do it themselves.
Interesting. Can any of the panelists speak a little more on the process of requesting accommodations in college, both at the college level, but also at the professor level? Did you ever receive any resistance from professors?
Can I speak about this?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Hugh.
Yes. So so far I haven't encountered any resistance from the professor, because before the semester even begin, the student with disability office usually they provide the form for us, and they instruct us of how to bring it to the professor and explain that this is the reasonable accommodation. And the professor just look at the form, and then after that they will contact the Office of Student with Disability. And if they have any question, the Office of Accessibility will be the one that answer it for the professor. So as a student, I don't have to do that much.
I can speak from the professors'
Yes,
end
okay.
of it. The science professors were actually very happy to have us on board because there were times they wanted to assist, but they didn't know how to assist. And so to have us involved, and also to have the Office of Disability involved, they didn't feel like they were alone, and that we could all sit together as a team and problem solve how to give best the accommodation for the individual that was in need. So they were actually very open to having discussions and implementing things that could be done immediately, and if not, how they would go about doing the stuff that would take a little longer.
Yeah, from the professor perspective, I can say two things, actually from the father perspective. So my daughter has a disability, and she was in chemistry, microbiology, organic chemistry, and organic chemistry is one of the big kind of, I would say almost like a hazing type class. And the professor was really resistant to accommodating her ability to leave the room during the class lecture to change the batteries in her infusion pump. And I think it was a case where it's a very large class and a large number of students. From being a professor myself, I can tell you one of the biggest issues that is faced is not the willingness of the professor, but the ability of the professor. Many things require extended time for exams, and things like that require getting classroom space or office space, or places where students can work in in a quiet environment. And those spaces just don't exist on college campuses largely. And it becomes almost a coordination issue, such that disability services really is swamped with the ability, because they don't have the control of the rooms, of the calendar for rooms. And so accommodation, I think there's a degree of training that needs to be done around offering specific types of accommodations, with many of them now being requests for extended time on exams and things like that. As a professor, I always give untimed exams, so I don't have to deal with that problem as much. But I don't run these big sections with like 400, 200 people where 5% asking for untimed exams would cause real issues with regard to getting space on on campus. Anyone else have anything to add?
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Bryce.
So full disclosure, I've had Andrew as a professor, but I've had overwhelmingly positive
the best
experience.
professor, of course.
You just wanted that on the transcript, make it official. But
that's right.
Yes, but no, I've had overall a very positive experience asking for accommodations. Usually with morning or early afternoon classes, I will discuss with the professor just kind of what my situation is, and usually the best accommodation is just to record the lecture, and they'll upload it onto Canvas, the software we use, after the class is over, and then if I end up missing, I can view it later. And I have had, luckily, only one in all of my my experience in college, one professor that was less than accommodating. Unfortunately, they're at the institution I'm at now, so I'm going to choose my words carefully. But I would just say I've had one out of all of them that have been not ideal. But overall, most are very quick to accommodate. So happy with that.
Great. Can any of you speak about the role of mentors, either formal mentoring through a mentoring program, or kind of just mentoring in a more informal way?
I can speak a little bit to the informal way. I've never had a formal mentoring program, but I've had countless professors. Quite a number stick out in my mind, both in the master's degree and the undergrad degrees, that really helps me kind of figure out, okay, these are your skill sets. These are what you're really good at. This is how you help market yourself. And kind of having that support and learning how to kind of sell yourself, even though you may have an internalized attitude that because of your diagnosis or your disability, you may be limited. And having that support from those colleagues saying no, you can do this, I think is a huge help. Personally for me, I can't speak to the other panelists, but for me was a great help in navigating post-grad life.
Okay.
I think there was another question, Andrew, which we may have responded to online, but can any of the panelists talk to the role that state vocational rehabilitation program may have had in your college experience or in your post-college experience in terms of becoming employed?
I can speak to the fact that during the Mind Alliance, we would check to make sure that individuals were connected to the voc rehab facility in their borough. So in New York City, we have many boroughs, and you go to the one where you're living, where you're located. We found that some students were connected to their VR and others were not. And we would then extend ourselves to that VR agency to assist in how to start the paperwork for the students in the Mind Alliance. I don't know if that answers the question, John.
To go in a little bit more detail, I didn't know about VR services, ironically, till post undergrad. Had I known about them early on, that maybe would have been a better financial support. I didn't know about them till after the fact, so it was a very ironic situation, because usually that's flipped around. But ultimately, I think having that, and for us, I'm outside of the city, so I was county-based, was really helpful in helping to determine, what are my options, what could VR services do for a career path, and really sit down and have that discussion, which pushed me into going into counseling as an alternative.
I think that's an important point because you can, Andrew, I'm going to step on you a little bit, that the state vocational rehabilitation program services can be accessed at any time during your career. It's not just, at the graduation point, but maybe even post-grad if you want to enhance your career options.
Also, yeah, John, so, particularly, I'm aware of this in New York, where many students will use voc rehab to help subsidize tuition and books and various items. I think I don't want to, you can't hold me to this, but I once looked at expenses across the states for voc rehab, and about 50% of spending for vocational rehabilitations was on post-secondary education. And it's a big role. And so there are subsidies out there. It's kind of surprising to hear that students don't hear about it, but voc rehab is still a relatively small program in comparison to things like Social Security that play a role. This could be someplace where we look into how disability services conveys to students potential income sources, tuition support.
Mm-hmm. I think at times, Andrew, especially in New York State, it takes time to get connected if you're not connected to the VR agency. And so if they start this process early in high school or early, let's just say community college or college, it can be very beneficial, as you indicated, to assist them with tuition and books and transportation at times they provide financially.
That's right. And every little bit can help sometimes, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
All right, so I'm going to advance the slide. We're just about at the 2 minutes over. Thank you all for your questions. We're going to be closing the comments now. Oh no, those are closing comments, sorry. Thank you all. You can receive the information on the results of the survey at the KesslerFoundation.org KF Survey 2020-webinar. Also, you can take a survey here if you want to go get the slides or click on it in Zoom. You can take a response survey. Thank you all for your participation. If you can reach us, let's see if we have, we don't have a reach us. You can always reach John O'Neill at Kessler Foundation if you have any questions. You can find him on the Kessler Foundation website. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye. Oh, weekend, wait, it's not Friday. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, John.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks to Bryce, Marie, and Hugh.
Yes, thank you. All of you.
All right, bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.